Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your Viceroy of Verisimilitude, your Sommelier of Sci-Fi, your Chancellor of Cheerfulness, your Archduke of Banterbury, your existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, Robert Meyer Burnett coming at you, Robcasting, Love Brokers, Robcasting you from the Robservatory today. That was a little Night Shift reference real quick thrown in there. Bill Blazejowski. I am coming at you, you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community that make up what all imagination connoisseurs make up, and that's this community. And it's great to be here. This is Robservations, the show about something. Robservations, episode number 367. My God, California, Gavin Newsom stepped up, and now we're basically all staying at home. And for me, as I've said before, not a big change of pace. I get to sit here and robcast from you, robcast to you, robcasting from here to you. And tonight, ladies and gentlemen, don't forget the fourth episode of Elizaviews, Whining About Movies, is coming at you, where Elizabeth and I look at 1984's The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension. We're all Hong Kong Cavaliers, aren't we? Anyway, we're going to take you to Yo-Yo-Dyne propulsion systems and beyond, because remember, wherever you go, there you are. Tonight at 8 o'clock Pacific time, tune in. It means a lot when you do, and your kind comments are all read by Elizabeth, and she is digging being on YouTube. So that's good. That's good. A lot of craziness happening. A lot of craziness out there. Hope everyone is staying safe. I mean, we got teenage girls here. They want to bring all their friends over to do their nails. You know? So who cares what Gavin Newsom says? Because, young people, they're strong and they're great incubators. I'm sure if instead of the coronavirus we had face huggers inside of us, it would all be a different story. But what are you going to do? Kids will be kids. Listen, kids, stay home, wash your hands, do what your parents tell you. That's what I say. Anyway, really interesting stuff going on, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I want to thank you for being here. Boy, do I have letters, man. I got to tell you, I keep saying it every week, every day. I'm blown away by the letters people are writing me. And today is no exception. I mean, I am getting a deluge of letters. And if you want to send me letters that I will read on this show, right down there, send them to theburnettwork.net. Go to our website, and the letters that I do read on this show will eventually be on the website. There's hundreds and hundreds of letters up there now. You can comment, you can interact, you can send the writers who wrote those letters anything you think about what they have to say. And I want to say it's such a big part of the show, hearing from you, all the diverse opinions, and people taking me to task, which I enjoy. And I think it's tremendous. And I want to thank you guys for sending, keeping the you guys are elevating the discourse. And I think that's a great thing. And I want to thank you for it. It's pretty amazing. Now, as many of you know, the motion picture viewing landscape has changed. Basically, all movie theaters are shut down. They are in lockdown, which has caused a massive disruption in Hollywood. As a matter of fact, the Pixar film Onward, that has been in theaters just a few weeks, is dropping on Disney Plus today. Today, ladies and gentlemen, that is correct. You can watch Onward, the delightful new Pixar movie. You can see it on Disney Plus now. Unprecedented. There's amazing things that are happening on a daily basis. Well, as the summer movie season is taken away from us, the theaters are not just theaters. It's not just the theaters. It's the studios. It's the entire ecosystem of the motion picture business, which is basically, I wouldn't say that it's in free fall. It's just been shut down. Literally everything it's grinded to a halt, and it's not because of the proto-molecule. We're not frozen in place because of anything other than the situation we find ourselves in, and everybody is trying to figure out what to do. No one knows. No one's ever seen this before. And today, Sharon Waxman and Beatrice Verhoeven, Sharon Waxman has been covering the industry for quite some time, has an article that dropped at 10 o'clock this morning that I wanted to share with you. And we'll get into this. Warner Brothers debates whether Wonder Woman 1984 should skip theaters for streaming. Now, we've talked a lot about movies that are in theaters have been pulled, but can a tentpole movie make it just by streaming? Can the studios get a return on their investment? And I thought this particular article very, very interesting. With movie theaters closed across the globe for the indefinite period of time, Warner Brothers is discussing whether to take its upcoming DC Comics tentpole Wonder Woman 1984 directly to streaming and bypass theaters altogether. Two knowledgeable individuals told The Wrap. The discussions are still preliminary and have remained close to Warner Pictures Group Chairman Toby Emmerich and his top advisors, according to one individual with knowledge of the conversation. Even director Patty Jenkins and producer Charles Roven have not been brought into the talks. According to the Warner insiders, the preference is still to release the movie theatrically, but executives are considering a streaming alternative, probably as a direct-to-consumer offering rather than as part of Warner's soon-to-launch subscription service HBO Max. The concern, the insiders said, is that there is no known date for movie theaters to reopen, and there may be a shortage of favorable dates once theaters do come back online for the many films that have been postponed. Wonder Woman 1984 is still officially slated for wide release on June 4th. Roven and Jenkins would like to see the movie hit theaters in August, one insider said, but with so much uncertainty, Warner executives wonder if that is a realistic possibility amid a pandemic that has upended Hollywood and threatens to have long-term repercussions for the industry. Make no mistake, there already are long-term repercussions for the industry. Still, the insider said that there is not yet financial models that would allow the studio to compare the outcome of two distribution systems for a film with a budget that multiple other insiders told The Wrap is just short of $200 million. That is not including marketing. The studio would not confirm the budget. Warner president of domestic distribution Jeff Goldstein told The Wrap that there have not been any streaming discussions. We're looking to release the movie theatrically. That's our plan, he said. An individual close to the film confirmed that Jenkins had no discussions with the studio about a streaming option. Roven also dismissed the idea of a streaming-only release. It's ludicrous if you consider how big this movie is, he said in an interview. Everybody recognizes that, as interesting as streaming might be, if you want a huge global worldwide box office, you've got to release it in movie theaters. Indeed, analysts like Lightshed's Rich Greenfield have questioned whether video on demand could generate the kind of revenue and profits that studios typically see from the theatrical release of blockbusters like a Wonder Woman sequel. Patty Jenkins' 2017 original grossed $822 million based on a budget between $120 and $150 million. The discussions at Warner's to consider streaming follows Universal's decision last week to distribute Trolls World Tour directly on over-the-top platforms for a 48-hour rental fee of $19.99. That decision came amid the spread of coronavirus panic, but while most U.S. theaters were still open and was initially intended as a day-and-date release timed with opening in theaters, in the days since that decision, theater chains across the country have closed for an indefinite period because of the public health risk. The Universal move has already raised questions about the ability of theater chains to maintain the sanctity of traditional home video release windows or home release windows in the face of rising streaming powerhouses. Universal is also planning early VOD releases for 3 films that were in theaters when they closed: The Hunt, Invisible Man, and Emma. A number of others have followed suit for films just in theaters, including Warner's Birds of Prey and The Way Back, Sony's Bloodshot, Disney's Onward, and Lionsgate's I Still Believe. But Wonder Woman is another order of magnitude, given that 2017's Wonder Woman was the highest-grossing film by a solo female director and was the 10th highest-grossing film of that year. Based on the success of the first film, as well as the other recent solo endeavors in the DC universe, Wonder Woman 84 was expected to be a big summer blockbuster, and the hope was that it would hit $1 billion in global revenue. By comparison, Aquaman took in $1.15 billion based on a $160 million budget, and Shazam earned $366 million on a $100 million budget. But the math of a VOD-only release could be challenging. If the film skips theatrical release, Warner Brothers would have to hit tens of millions of streaming purchases to make the move financially worthwhile. A recent analysis by Greenfield showed that a billion-dollar grossing film normally produces $375 million in profit, but traditional VOD could not generate that type of revenue or profit. According to Greenfield, replacing theatrical gross, this is the most important thing I'm editorializing here about why, for those of you who want to know why movies don't go streaming, take particular note of this. Let me start again. The recent analysis by Greenfield showed that a billion-dollar grossing film normally produces $375 million in profit. So remember, if a movie costs $200 million and grosses $1 billion, it only makes, I know it seems strange to say only, but it only makes $375 million in profit. But traditional VOD could not generate that type of revenue or profit. According to Greenfield, replacing theatrical gross profit would require 16 to 21 million downloaded units sold for a $1 billion movie, assuming a charge of $30 to $40 per film rental. He noted that the most profitable pay-per-view event in U.S. history was the Mayweather-Pacquiao fight in 2015, which grossed $400 million from 4.4 million buys, charged at $90 per buy. That's grossed $400 million. It's hard to imagine moviegoers even paying $30 to $40 for a new release every month, so home video wouldn't even come close to that fight's revenue. Now, and you can see right away that there's no way you could generate that $375 million profit on a $400 million buy at $90 for that. I mean, the numbers just don't work. Wonder Woman has developed into an incredibly successful franchise for Warner and catapulted Gadot to international stardom, not to mention a symbol of feminine heroism. Set during the late height of the Cold War tensions, the sequel sees Diana Prince come into conflict with the Soviet Union and encountering a new enemy, the villain Cheetah. The film brings back Jenkins as director and co-writer, along with Chris Pine as Steve Trevor. Pedro Pascal has also been cast in the film as Maxwell Lord, a favorite character of mine, introduced in Justice League International, the comedy version of the Justice League that I was so adamantly opposed to until I read the first issue, and I was in. Those first 12 issues of that series are golden. If you ever want to pick those up, pick them up. There's a great omnibus, despite the fact that there's some printing errors in that omnibus. That Justice League International omnibus is dope. And it also introduced Kevin Maguire onto the comic book scene. I mean, does anybody draw faces, more expressive faces than Kevin Maguire? I don't know. But anyway, I can't believe Maxwell Lord is a character in a major studio picture. It's crazy to me. The individual with knowledge of the studio said that Warner had also considered sending last year's DC Comics film Joker to streaming platforms rather than theaters, after an initial public outcry against the violent themes of the Todd Phillips film. That went on to gross $1 billion worldwide and earned Oscars for lead actor Joaquin Phoenix and Hildur Gudmundsdottir's score. Roven said a decision about moving Wonder Woman 84 would wait as long as possible. There may come a time we have to make that decision, but why not stay here as long as we can and hope for the best, he asked. I don't think it would be prudent to make a move until all factors have been taken into consideration. Humberto Gonzalez, our fan Humberto, contributed to this report. Look, as we've talked about on the John Campea show and here, you cannot make a movie right now that costs $150 million to $200 million, release it on VOD first, exclusively, and get a return. We just don't live in that world yet. Maybe if they could do it day and date across the planet and turn it into an event. We don't even live in that world yet. No one's thinking that way. They're not expecting that. Nobody knows what would look like, or that it's even possible. Unfortunately, we just don't know. And while there is talk about it, I'm sure they're trying to figure out the reason. And again, I keep saying this lately, but remember, the studios are not sitting on piles of cash with which they make these movies. They are borrowing this money. They're borrowing the budgets of these films. They have revolving credit lines. They're able to do that. So when they make a movie that costs anywhere from 150 to 200 million bucks, well, hell, any movie, you're incurring a lot of interest fees. And the longer this film has been done for a while, Patty Jenkins talked about how this film was done quite some time ago, but they had already locked it into this release. She had talked about, well, I wish we could release it earlier. So this movie has been done for a long time. So they're already outside the normal window where a film like this would start generating a return on its investment. And we have not yet seen, they haven't seen that. And I'm sure the studio's like, we got to get back and pay this money back. Because they are, in fact, incurring lots of interest payments, which is not something that, they necessarily want to do. But yeah, so it's tough. I don't think that we're going to see a large tentpole movie go out exclusively video on demand until the world embraces the idea. These look, like every other industry, Hollywood, this is a brutal storm Hollywood is enduring. This is a Category 5 hurricane for the entertainment industry. We are shut down. Kudos to Netflix for setting up a big fund to help people in the entertainment industry that are out of work. Good on them. There's a lot of people that are stepping up to help all these others that are not, no one's getting paid. And paycheck to paycheck. I mean, a lot of people that work in the entertainment business, it's a gig economy. You get hired for a gig, and when that gig's over, you might not get another gig for months, sometimes even years, depending. And it's rough. It is rough out there. Lucky for me, I mean, I've still got some work, and I'm doing the old YouTube business, but it is rough. It is rough out there. And it's rough for the studios. It's rough for the movie theaters. The whole the whole movie ecosystem is literally shut down. And everybody involved it's not good. And everyone knows that. And it's not good in a lot of places. But since I specifically addressed the entertainment on this channel, I want to speak about that. And that's not to say I'm not sending out my condolences and my hopes and my dreams to everybody that is deeply affected by this global crisis. But again, I maintain the position that watching how quickly this is unfolded and how people are taking precautions and they are clamping down, I give it up for Governor Gavin Newsom for taking this kind of decisive action. Even my local government here in Pasadena has done so. And for the most part, I've been very impressed with my fellow citizens. So thank you for all of that. And I really appreciate the amount of civility that's going on in this time. I'm sure as the weeks, hopefully not months, but as the weeks drag on, it's going to get harder and harder, I know. But it's very interesting to see that these alternatives and different plans are being taken into consideration. I just think that Wonder Woman will be pushed to a later date. I don't think we're going to see it go VOD. And let's hope, one of the things that I hope is that when all of this is past, and it will pass, when it's past us, that people will return to the movie theaters. I don't think they're going to flock to movie theaters. I mean, depending on where we wind up, depending on where the next 3 or 4 weeks take us, people aren't necessarily going to be keen to gather in large numbers, but we'll see how long it takes the movie business to jump back, to snap back. It's tough out there. It is tough out there. I think I'm going to start, I don't know, right away. I'm just going to hit it, man. I'm just going to hit it. Doug Harris writes in and says, "Greetings, RMB and the rest of the Post-Geek Singularity from my house. I used to watch Joe Bob Briggs and Mystery Science Theater 3000 at just the right age, and I grew to love cult movies. From the old Godzilla to the slasher movies of the 80s and everything in between. My question, What movies from the previous decade do you think will obtain cult movie status? The movies I can think of off the top of my head are The Witch, You Were Never Really Here, and Terrifier. Well, that's interesting. I got to say, I love this question. Doug, here's the thing. I would say that The Witch and You Were Never Really Here they're pretty highbrow in terms of what they are, and they're very highly regarded. I mean, obviously the performance, Joaquin Phoenix's performance in You Were Never Really Here is really, really great. And not that cult movies can't be that, but I think The Witch and You Were Never Really Here were really recognized as being great. But definitely those are good. Terrifier is certainly one that could. I would throw out the recent Mandy, Nicolas Cage's Mandy, and the director of Mandy, Panos Cosmatos, George P. Cosmatos' son. I would also throw out Beyond the Black Rainbow. The movie he made previously, before he made Mandy, is definitely up there for cult movie status. That's a really interesting list. I mean, there's a lot more. Maybe things like Anna and the Apocalypse. It could be one, which I have sitting right behind me. Or, The Invitation that I so love. Karen Kusama's The Invitation I would consider maybe a cult movie. There's a lot. That's a really interesting question. I mean, it really depends. I think it's a great question. I'm a huge Joe Bob Briggs fan. I mean, I read his movie reviews in the 80s. I lived for them in the paper. They were published, I think, in the Seattle Times. And I'm a huge fan of his. And it's great to see him coming back. And he was writing stuff for, I guess he just wrote a review of The Invisible Man for Fangoria. And it's great to hear that you are a fan of his, because I've been a fan of his for a very, very long time. And that's great. That's a great question. This next one comes from Crosstalk. Hey, Rob, from the Great White North up here in Edmonton. Been a while since I've dropped you a letter, so I figured with being locked in for a while now is the time to do so. I've largely been silent about the Star Trek Picard series, except when talking with my dad and an old family friend about it. As a side note, they both like the Expanse and Battlestar Galactica feel to it, where I do not. I will try my best to keep spoilers to a vague or minimum. Look, nothing can spoil Picard more than the show itself. That's as far as I'm concerned. Okay, my feelings on the series are summed up with exactly 2 scenes throughout the run of this series so far. The first is in episode 7, where Picard meets up with Riker and Troy chews Picard out for a smarmy comment he makes to Soji. She is questioning her reality, and like a prick, Picard kind of tongue-in-cheeks make fun of her. At least it comes across that way. First, Picard is a diplomat. His whole life he's been a man of words. I'm not saying he doesn't have a sense of humor, but never was it condescending or passive-aggressively mean like his comment here was. This feels more like Patrick Stewart with his sense of humor overlaying the character of Picard to the point that this isn't Picard anymore. This is Patrick Stewart playing himself in a Star Trek show. On the second, the second monumentally stupid thing was in this last episode, episode 9, where a synth, not an organic one, which is stupid as an idea to me anyhow, either a full-on metal body synth like Data uses a learned ability to communicate with Jurati. Wow, just wow. That would be the mind meld scene. I barely have the words to describe how much stupid fits in this scene. Okay, rant over. I won't spoil any more. I just really needed to say how I felt without people rolling their eyes at me for thinking about it too much. Also, what is it with the tone of this show? Okay, I'm not getting into that. So here we are. Everything we watch seems to suck all the fun out of any existing properties they are making shows and movies now. What happened to fun? These last 5 years, it has only seemed to get more dour and self-serious. Even Deep Space Nine with the Dominion War had breaks between serious episodes with levity. And where are the basic story elements that make sense? No forethought, no planning, fly by the seat of your pants, one draft storytelling is wearing on me. I don't hate Picard. The actors are decent. The show looks great. But is that all we're relegated to nowadays? Where are the basic story beats for Star Trek? Why does nothing have explanations? Or why are the explanations so stupid? Man, I'm getting away from myself now. I don't want to dislike any of this, but story problems take me right out of a story, and I start thinking about it while watching the show. That's not good. I lose immersion. Anyhow, I just felt like dropping you a line about how I felt on the show, summed up in 2 scenes. So in any case, I'll leave it at that. Sorry to the chat if I started more Trek drama. Oh, I don't think you're going to be the only one today, Crosstalk. Farewell for now, and much love from Edmonton. And as always, take off, hosers. Thank you for that, Crosstalk. You know, I'm going to refrain from commenting on your letter because I know that there's more coming up. Call me crazy. But yeah, we'll get into that because there's a couple of doozies. First of all, there's a lot of people who are sending in tips. Let me just jump back to people who are. Let's see. Calvin Bowes, our man Calvin in Portland, father of Braxton, who we've seen on the show. Have you ever seen The Phantom of the Paradise? Ah, yes. I wrote to John about that, and he'd never heard of it, even though it was directed by Brian De Palma. What are your thoughts? Phantom of the Paradise is great. Paul Williams, who was on Daft Punk's last album. Yeah, I mean, Phantom of the Paradise to me is one of the great, talk about a cult movie, one of the great rock and roll takes on the Phantom of the Opera story. And it was directed by Brian De Palma. And I love Phantom of the Paradise. I do, of course, own it. I almost owned an action figure of the Phantom of the Paradise, but I was not quick enough on the draw. I love Phantom of the Paradise. Look, here's the thing. You know, don't criticize people when they don't know of a movie. And I think that, you know, unless you grew up in a time or you were the kind of person that was drawn towards these kinds of movies, they can definitely fall through the cracks. You know, and directors 60s and 70s, if you start talking about Ken Russell movies, you know, a lot of people don't know the music lovers. A lot of people might know Tommy and Altered States, but they don't necessarily know Ken Russell's oeuvre before that. So there's a lot of interest, and I don't know why I'm comparing Ken Russell to Brian De Palma, but there's a lot of movies that people just don't know. And I think one of the things that I hope to do with my show, and I have been doing it obviously for a little over a year now, is just bringing up random shit that people hopefully can explore or find out about. I mean, I don't like I said, I don't consider myself some kind of cinematic oracle at Delphi, because I've come across movies I've never really heard of, but I've made a study of it. And I think Phantom of the Paradise is one of the great cult movies of the 70s. I mean, it's not a cult like Rocky Horror Picture Show, but I definitely think they're in the same ballpark. They would be flying in the same Air Force together. What does even that mean? I don't know. But yes, Calvin, I'm a big fan of Phantom of the Paradise. I own Phantom of the Paradise, and maybe that's a show or movie we'll cover on Whining About Movies. I highly recommend it to anybody who likes movies like that, because it is a great film. Very enjoyable. Zachary King sends in a tip and says, enjoyed yet another one. Your Picard, one of your Picard rants on yesterday's show. Bravo to folks like yourself, Doomcock, and others who demand more of modern-day storytelling. Please keep fighting the good fight. We're counting on you. Yeah, you know, I don't take any pleasure in it. I don't know. I mean, some people seem to take pleasure in it. It just kind of bums me out. You know, I was thinking, I didn't mention this on the show yesterday, but I was thinking about the name of the planet that the synths live on, where their Malibu wellness colony is, and the it's called Coppelius. The first ballet that I ever saw, that my grandmother took me to, was Coppelia, which is essentially about it's about a robot. It's about a girl robot. And like Coppelius, I mean, is that creative? Does that show like, hey, I feel like these kind of on the nose things. And I read a Shaban interview where he's talking about the names of planets were important to him. And he did co-write this episode with his wife. Maybe that was his wife's idea. I don't know. But it just seems like these things are just they're like creative for a college 101 writing course. I mean, anyway, I don't know. But yeah, and we're gonna get into that. But Zachary, I appreciate my rants, that you appreciate my rants on Picard. A lot of people don't. A lot of people are like, Rob, we're in the middle of a global pandemic. Give it a rest. I'm like, yeah, but Star Trek's been inspiring me for 50 years. Well, I should say 40. Well, I can say 50 years because I'm still inspired by classic Star Trek and things that have come, say, before 2009. But anyway, I appreciate at least you like my rants. Willow sends in a tip. Hello, Willow. Someone recommended Chappelle's show yesterday. What's your favorite Chappelle sketch? It's pretty outrageous, but the frontline Clayton Bigsby sketch is so hilarious. Oh my God. Okay. For those of you who might not know your Chappelle show sketches, the frontline Clayton Bigsby sketch it's done like a frontline documentary. And I don't know if he's actually the guy, but they have an actor who's delivering that guy. You know his voice. If you've ever watched a frontline documentary, they basically have, I think maybe it is the guy. Maybe it's the guy who narrates all the frontline documentaries, but you actually see him, and it's about the world's first black white supremacist. It's genius. That documentary, that sketch is genius. And Dave Chappelle plays Clayton Bigsby. It's Bigsby, right? Clayton Bigsby. And you meet him, and he's blind, and he doesn't know he's a white supremacist, but he doesn't know he's black because he's blind. It's genius. And by the way, when you go back and you watch these Chappelle show sketches, if you go back and you watch them, you can find they're all over the web. There's a very liberal use of the N-word, and they don't care. And it's really interesting. You go back and you watch it, and it's like, wow, that's pretty shocking. I mean, some of my favorite, that's pretty good. I don't know if it's my favorite. I mean, I loved the Charlie Murphy True Hollywood Stories, and being the Prince fan that I am, the Charlie Murphy True Hollywood Stories Chappelle sketch about Prince, when they meet Prince at a club and they go back and they play basketball. That one kills me. I mean, I love that sketch. There's a lot of Chappelle sketches. Reparations. There's a sketch about reparations. There's so many good Chappelle sketches. It's funny. Well, I don't know if it's funny, but Charlie Murphy, when G4 started playing the remastered versions of Star Trek, Charlie Murphy, they did these amazing, they did these bumpers with action figures, the Star Trek action figures. And Charlie Murphy did the voice of Spock. Chilling at my casa. He kills me. And he did a few of those True Hollywood Stories, and it was a running thing, and so good. Man, I love those, though. I really, really do. Swack Prop sends in a tip and says, Et Arcadia Ego famously refers to Poussin's painting from the 15th century. It generally translates to mean, even in utopia, there is death. Yes. Sounds like a snobbish way for the showrunners to brush away fan criticism of the show having a high mortality rate. Yeah, it's a little pretentious all up in that hizzle over there. Yeah, and it's interesting. Look, I appreciate the literary allusions and whether you're going to, but it just seems like, look, I get it. classic Star Trek had some great titles. Requiem for Methuselah. Who Mourns for Adonais? Is There in Truth No Beauty? I did love me a good title, but it's kind of like, okay, we're gonna drop some Latin or whatever. I get it, I understand. Okay, but to me, it's just like I would rather you spend more time writing great scripts than trying to give me because it seems to me like these titles are specifically designed to make the audience do Google searches and go, oh, you guys are really smart who are writing that show, because you're making these references to paintings from the 15th century that I couldn't possibly know unless I had an art history background. But yeah. Seduce Screening Room sends in a tip and says, do you think Tenet will also be delayed as it's a July movie? I can't wait to see it in IMAX. Rewatching Silver Linings Playbook today. Stay safe and wash your hands. I can't help it. Elizabeth makes me wash my hands. I mean, I come out of the bathroom after washing my hands. She makes me go right back in and wash them again. A lot of hand washing going on here up in this hizzle. And I am doing that. Yes, I don't know. I mean, Tenet is probably, in terms of summer, my most eagerly awaited film of the summer. Christopher Nolan's new movie that looks like it's playing a lot with time, and I'm very, very excited about it. I don't know if it's going to get pushed. I think it's an evolving situation, and we're going to have to wait and see where we're at. If you look at the numbers, they're going up, and they're going to be going up for the next couple of weeks if they follow the trends. It's interesting. If you watch what happens, I'm keeping my eye on what's going on in both Italy and in South Korea to see where we're at. So, we'll see. Hopefully it will change, but you never know. Hey, Mr. B, Suthius is here. How you doing, Suthius? Suthius sends in a tip and says, hey, Mr. B, though I don't remember much of TNG, I have been following Picard, and I've been liking what I've seen so far. But holy moly, today's episode is just wonky. Not sure if it's from the directing or the editing, but today's episode is, well, kind of poopish. I would say so. Look, Akiva Goldsman can't direct his way out of a paper bag. And the Michael Chabon and his wife, Eilette Waldman, wrote a script that is all over the place. I mean, we're basically getting, I can't help but think we're getting a riff on Descent. The two-part Descent 1 and 2, and then, of course, we've got the android body all the way back to what are little girls made of. Let's transfer Picard's consciousness into an android body so he can live forever, which maybe they're going to end that way or not. I don't know. I have no knowledge, but how do you stop Patrick Stewart from aging if they want to do 7 seasons of Picard? I don't know. Is that going to be lore? These ideas are not new. Transferring consciousness. I mean, Noonien Sung did it with his wife. There was already Juliana Trainer, all that. Juliana Sung, we talked about that before. Again, if anybody read David Mack's trilogy about all the Sung androids, which is great, they would know this. But I feel like I'm looking at these breadcrumbs. I think Picard is a show that has been interesting because the audience is so far ahead of this show. The scripting is, I think, one of the reasons we already know where it's going. They introduce, I'm very disappointed. Now that Space Legolas is no longer fighting in the same corridor, he's just, off with 7 of 9? I mean, they spent a whole episode where Picard was bonding with this kid when they're over with the Romulan Dora Milaje, and they're I know they're not the Dora Milaje, but they spent all this time to go get this kid, and Picard having a mentor and then they just abandon him. Like, I don't get it. Anyway, yes, I did think it was terrible. It was terrible. Dan V sends, well, Warner Brothers already debunked that report from the Wrap with a statement. off of IndieWire. It doesn't make sense financially, and China is re-releasing Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone on April 30th in 3D and 4K to get people out. Wonder Woman 84 would just be delayed. Yeah, that's why I want to read the article. They're not going to do that, and they never were going to do that. But there's probably talks. I mean, they were looking... all the article said was that there were talks. They didn't say they were going to do it. And obviously, the article lays out pretty succinctly that there's no way a studio can make money back doing something like that. They just can't. They can't make, like the article points out, $1 billion gross for a movie like that means $375 million into the coffers of the studio. That's $375 million profit. That is nothing to shake a stick at, so they can't. Richard sends in a tip and says, he shouts this, "Go Romulans, you were right all the time. Get to the planet before they summon Robot Lucifer." You know, now that you say that, I would love to see Robot Lucifer from the original Battlestar Galactica show up. Also, here's another thing that I really don't like about Picard. Now, according to these assholes, it's canonical that there is a multi-galaxy spanning synthetic life form force, unless it's all BS. But if there is this galaxies spanning a synth force out there, I don't like that. I mean, it seems like in the Star Trek universe, sure, they've brought up people like the Takan Empire and the Iconians, but the idea that and the Q is on a whole different plane of existence, so that doesn't bother me. But this idea that some kind of force like that, and what is their obsession with artificial life? Don't they have any other story ideas? I mean, this was Discovery Season 2. I mean, who knows? I don't know. But yeah, I hope that the Zhat Vash is going to be seen as the saviors of all. I don't know. Why do these stories have to end up being this big? Why can't they just, bring it down a little bit? Stubble McShave says, "Do you think Paramount and other weak studios will survive this?" That's a very good question. A studio like Amazon could purchase such weakened studios and add their catalog to their streaming service. They have good finances, and it mainly deals with streaming, which is doing good now. Look, clearly, having a studio library is always a good thing for a streaming service. And I thought Paramount was going to be in some kind of a partnership with Netflix. Now CBS, with the Viacom merger, if it indeed goes through the way it's supposed to go through, they have Paramount to start a larger streaming service. But to buy out a studio and then dissolve a studio, it's weird to me. I mean, wouldn't you want that studio and use that brand name to keep making movies? I don't know. It's one thing to buy a streaming service. Amazon already has. They've dipped heavily into production themselves, obviously. So now they've got that. Having a studio lot might be effective, but it's, they made Picard here, but they've been making Discovery in Canada. It's so expensive to make movies here in the United States. I don't know what they're going to do. It'll be interesting to see where that goes. Here's a letter from our man James Wallace. "Hi, Rob. Now I'm ticked. Star Trek Picard really went off the deep end with the episode Et in Arcadio Ego Part 1. Why is it called Part 1? This whole season is one continuous story. Every episode ends on a cliffhanger of sorts. Maybe I'm missing something, but to me, that just shows how much these producers and writers aren't thinking. I didn't think about that. Why is it Part 1? This week, I've watched old episodes of TNG just to remind me what Star Trek used to be. Also, I watched a few of the TNG films. Patrick Stewart's a great actor, but he shouldn't be involved in the creative process at all. I think the only time he kind of got it right was First Contact. He suggested Picard should be on the Enterprise and not Riker. Makes sense. Picard had more of an intimate past with the Borg. The problem is Picard became an action hero after that. I recall William Shatner saying back in 1994 that he asked a friend about the difference between Picard and Kirk. Shatner was told, "Kirk will fight right away." Picard would say, "Okay, drop your gun." "No, seriously, drop it." Giving you a minute to drop the gun. That was a good way of describing the characters and their differences. After Generations, Picard wasn't really Picard anymore. The character was becoming more and more like Patrick Stewart. Over the years, Stewart has made his politics known, and it shows in Star Trek Picard. The producers needed him. He knew, and he took advantage of it, and the writers were his echo chamber. I've worked around actors or celebrities, and the attitude is usually, they're always right. I have no doubt that's what happened when Stewart was in the writer's room. Episode 9 starts out in kind of an original way with the flowers, or whatever the hell they were, and then when Picard or Stewart goes into Professor X mode, seriously, that was Professor X, didn't help he was strapped into a chair when he did that bit. Was no one thinking on set? Oh yeah, that's right, no one cares anymore on the show. It doesn't help that Chabon's wife was a co-writer and Akiva Goldsman was directing. Then Brent Spiner shows up as another Singh. He's played 3 Singhs. I think that's a record. Pretty wild how these Singhs look alike. Then Picard rescues Soji, and she turns her back on him. That fast? 2 days ago, she thought she was human. And now? Also, the I love you bit with Raffi? What the hell was that? The acting was terrible, and the writing was just lousy. I felt embarrassed for the actors. This show symbolizes what is wrong with the industry in regards to a fraternal creative atmosphere. These producers are a terrible club. I hope Sherry Redstone gets rid of all of them. And if Stewart is under contract, his input is ignored, but that's very doubtful. The new Star Trek is a creative zombie. Long live old Star Trek. Well, James, what can I say? A fine letter, sir, and can't disagree with you. This one comes from Dylan McCandless. Hey, Rob, on your most recent stream, you were discussing the latest episode of Picard. You raised a lot of logical questions concerning the whole synth situation, and while I don't have answers for all of them, I think I think I have the answer to one of the points you raised. The idea isn't supposed to be that there's a colony of advanced synths living in paradise, while the short-buth synths, as you put it, are cast out and forced to work at Utopia Planitia. Rather, at the time the androids were working at the shipyards, that colony did not yet exist. It was only after the attack on Mars and the subsequent ban on synths that Bruce Maddox and his new Dr. Sung, about whom I share your lore suspicions, went off on their own and established this colony. The reason the synths we saw on Mars were less advanced is the same reason that some of the synths at the colony look like Data, while others are indistinguishable from humans. It's because with each subsequent synth, Maddox and Sung were improving their craft and creating more advanced models. But if they began with Data, and they would have began with Data, I mean, if that was the beginning, why do they have those short buth synths? Why didn't they just have Data synths? They've got before at the Institute, and they could develop from before. I don't know. Anyway, I hope I explained that clearly. I completely understand why this confused you, however, as this show has done a piss-poor job of establishing its timeline and the order of events. Since this whole season has based its premise off of Measure of a Man, maybe if we're lucky, they'll base season 2 on yesterday's Enterprise, and we'll open the first episode with Guinan coming to Picard and saying, "Jean-Luc, this timeline is wrong." Hell, maybe whoever created this hellish timeline could be connected to that temporal Cold War plotline that was left hanging when the Enterprise was canceled. Or left when Enterprise was canceled. That's what I would do in order to fix this mess, but I'm sure whatever they do will be far more stupid. P.S. They're definitely going to transfer Jean-Luc's mind into that golem to get around his terminal illness. I think they expect that to be a big plot twist at the end, but I saw what they were setting up almost immediately. Well, I mean, considering all the way back to What Are Little Girls Made Of from the first season of Star Trek, the first season of the original Star Trek in 1966, they were transferring human minds into android bodies to live forever. This is, again, not something that is new to Star Trek. It's been around since literally 54 years ago when Star Trek had its first season. And that's why, I mean, I look at all of these, what we're seeing now, it's all rehash. It's not new. None of it's new. And I find myself wondering, Why is this show so creatively bankrupt? They've already had a Sung android that had its consciousness, a consciousness. Not only a Sung android that could age, which is why Lore probably ginned himself up to age. So he can be, Alden Sung, it's just, it's Alden and Yago Sung. So it's AI. His initials are literally AI Sung. That's his initials. Is that clever? Is that cute? I don't know. But thanks for writing this letter. I can't disagree with you. But yeah, I mean, I look, I just don't understand. I guess I don't understand because they didn't really go into it. They really needed to explain I would have done it with that interview show, like with that Federation News Network show. They would have began with a whole, rather than just talk about the uprising, talk about the history of synths. Like, why didn't we learn that? I don't know. Stephanie Littlepage sent in a super chat. Why, hi, Stephanie. Thank you for that. Hello, RMB. Captain Robert April and I left Florida only to come back to a real-life version of Stephen King's The Stand, as well as the captain getting screwed over by the VA. I'm sorry. That is a bummer. I'm sorry. Sean Pullen sent in a super chat and said, "You're my Captain Cusick from DS9's The Sound of Her Voice, except you're a guy. In my self-isolation, I tune in, I hear your voice, and I feel less alone." Well, thank you, Sean. I appreciate that. With your letters, I feel less alone. So I'm glad. Paul Gilmore tipped $1 and said, "It was fantastic to see Robert Forster in his last role on Amazing Stories, the reboot." So he's terrific in it. You know, I haven't watched that. Yet. I can't wait. Is it good? I've heard it. It's not as good as it should be. Stub McShave sends in another tip and says, "I was wondering about a thing in Picard. As I understand it, a virus infects a human cell, replicates and uses the cell's new material to make new viruses. How does a silica virus replicate new viruses? Where does the new virus get the silica from?" Dude, don't even get me started. Again, the stupid in this show is it just keeps going. It just keeps going. Kaz Graphics sent in, very generous super chat. Thank you, sir. Hello, Seattle, the International District. As I sit at home, a movie that I feel gets no love, but I think is great, is The Fisher King with Robin Williams. Any thoughts on this film? Thanks. I love The Fisher King. It's Terry Gilliam. The relationship, well, excuse me. I love that. The relationship that Jeff Bridges has with Robin Williams, and it's Mercedes Rule, isn't it? Is it Mercedes Rule? I think who's in that. The Fisher King is a wonderful, wonderful movie. I dare say it might be my favorite Terry Gilliam movie. Could be my favorite. So good for you. Good for loving that film. That is a great film. I've owned many different versions of it over the years. But yeah, that's a really, really good movie, and one of my favorite, if not the favorite Terry Gilliam movie for me, it's certainly up there. But now that I'm thinking about his films, I mean, it's got to be 12 Monkeys and The Fisher King, but I might put The Fisher King first because there's a little bit more Terry Gilliam in it, definitely. Future Love of Former Films tips and says, critics' consensus, in my opinion, ruins the impartialness of Rotten Tomatoes. Too many times it differs from the actual consensus and sounds way more like Rotten Tomatoes staff's own opinion. It could be. I don't know about that. I don't know what they do. I mean, I don't necessarily know how that aggregate works, but it could be. I always take these things with a grain of salt. Rotten Tomatoes is to me, it should never be considered the end-all, be-all, but it's definitely something you can look at and consider. Richard sends in a tip and says, "Why is Seven crying over the old man she hates?" Who knows, man? I don't even know. It feels like, what are we at the end of Return of the King here? It's so bizarre. I would think like, okay, 7 of 9, her Borg cube has been destroyed, but doesn't now the Borg collective know that? I mean, are we going to see a mass? Is Starfleet going to show up? The Romulan fleet going to show up? The Borg fleet going to show up? And then the big bad Lucifer's synth god who spans the galaxies, are they all going to show up and have some gigantic battle? How are they going to possibly end this entire first season in an hour, even if they go over? But you know what? I guess they really want us to think that they've written some. I mean, this is going to be the Battle of King's Landing or something. But I just. They don't have to end this show this way. It can be quiet. They can have a quiet ending to something like this. A philosophical ending. More of a Star Trek The Motion Picture ending. But no, they're not. They're going to throw everything in the kitchen sink at this. And yeesh. Tiberius Monk sends in a super chat and says, I just purchased the Blade Runner collection, which I will watch after watching Citizen Kane for the first time for an online film club. Oh man, you're gonna love Citizen Kane. There's so much. If you have, you probably don't have the Blu-ray, but there's a great Blu-ray that has a lot of great supplementary features. Citizen Kane, by the way, I know people talk about it. Oh, it's one of the greatest movies ever made, and there's a lot of pushback. Well, how could it be? It is wildly entertaining. Citizen Kane is a wildly entertaining movie, and once you get into it, oh my God, the actors, the storyline, wildly entertaining. I can't recommend it highly enough. I really can't. Report back. Sorry, I just slurped on that drink a little. I was drinking and I was going to spill. But yeah, get into that. Emil Johansson sends in a letter and says, cynicism is not a bad thing. Westworld Season 3 introduced a new character they said is supposed to bring a warmer view of the world instead of just some other bad person or whatever. It's a nice guy. I know some of the criticism that Westworld got was that it was too cynical. That's why I want to say that cynicism is not a bad thing. First of all, why do people complain that a show is too cynical in the first place? Is it because it sends a negative message? Maybe we, deep down, all of us want to immerse ourselves into stories that give us a positive feedback of the world. I don't. Because the world is not necessarily good at all. It all depends on how you look at things, obviously, but why is looking at things on the bright side always the right side? Just because a show is cynical doesn't mean it's unrealistic at all, and it doesn't mean it's an evil show. Stories that try to send positive messages are really just shows in conflict with something they find negative. For a blissful audience, whatever message you want to spread as an anti to whatever hurts doesn't matter. I don't quite get that, I know, but I don't believe that. But I'm okay with people not agreeing with me. But I don't believe that always having a certain spin on a story is good for kids even, because I think it's important to prepare kids for a reality that isn't easy at all, at least not if you end up on the outside of it. Some people are convinced the world is fair and good and not cruel and harsh at all. I honestly don't believe that. So I like it when I see shows that actually deal with how shitty people can be. Being the Chancellor of Cheerfulness today is not easy. Anyone can suffer or struggle, and always being fed a message of how to be good, as if people who do let's see. Anyone can suffer or struggle, and always being fed a message of how to be good, as if people who do, as people who are always going to be good, is not helpful to those people. If a show can connect to people, then it is working, in my opinion, and a show can connect even if it's a cynical approach to humanity. Westworld rules. Well, I will tell you, Emil, I like cynical movies and cynical TV shows and all that. I mean, I have a fairly sunny disposition. I always have, because I've been. I have to say, I've quite enjoyed my short stint on this rock of ours as we spin around Seoul once a year. I quite enjoy it, and I think, yeah, I can be cynical. Look, human history has just been one horrible atrocity after another. It is a charnel house. even the 20th century, boy, we really got good at getting rid of people in the 20th century, whether you were Stalin, whether you were Pol Pot, whether you were Hitler and his Nazi regime, whether you're the Tutsi and the Hutu. I mean, there's just many instances of how horrible in the Balkans. We've been horrible to each other, and there's a reason to be deeply, deeply cynical. But on the other hand, you know what? The sun always rises. And I can only be a cynic for so long because the sun will always rise. There will always be another day. There will always be another chance to get it right and do something good. There's always something out there that I don't know, a person's story that I haven't heard, and you can be deeply cynical, but it's easy to be. Cynicism is easy. It's easy. I mean, I prefer, look, I make it a choice every day to get out of bed and persevere, to keep pushing forward, because there's going to be, I'm going to be gone soon. I mean, I have a lot more days behind me than in front of me. I hope I have as many days in front of me as I can get, but that's life. And I already understand life is a horrible, awful ordeal on a daily basis. I get it. I understand that. I do. But I'm here. Might as well make the most of it and enjoy myself. Now, I don't mind. Look, to me, Stanley Kubrick is, I think, he's my favorite director. He's one of my heroes. And a lot of people said he's a misanthrope and he doesn't like mankind. And I'm like, I don't believe that at all. I think Stanley Kubrick loves mankind, and all of his movies were saying to people, look, let's not be this way. He would tell these great stories about, look, Barry Lyndon is about a douchebag, scoundrel. Clockwork Orange, about a scoundrel. Lolita, about a scoundrel. Eyes Wide Shut is more of a celebration of the sanctity of marriage. I think Eyes Wide Shut is actually a fairly uplifting movie. The Shining, all of these things. A lot of his movies could be looked at, well, Spartacus, I guess. But what he's trying to do is he's trying to say we can be better than these people, but human folly is always inherently interesting. And what should we learn from it? To be better. But I like cynical stories too. I'm just not a cynic. And I think the real question is, you can embrace all the cynicism, whatever you want, but being cynical is easy. You know what's hard? Being an optimist and have fun. That's hard in this world because I already know the world sucks. What happens if our son, like you watch the movie Knowing, the Alex Proyas movie Knowing, that I actually really love. I mean, one day a solar flare comes and destroys all of humanity in a couple of minutes. The earth gets burned to a crisp. That could happen. We don't know. It could happen. So I prefer to rage against the dying of the light. Because why not? But I want to thank you for your letter. That was a good one. Okay. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, strap in. This is a long letter, but it's a good letter, and I'm going to read it. But it is long. Khaled Reza writes in. Khaled Reza. And, I like this letter, but it is long. I'll try and read it well. Hang on. Okay. Khaled, let's see if I do right by you. Hi, Rob. Hang on. You know what I'm gonna do? I'll put the camera on me and I'll try and read it. Like, hey, it's a performance. No, I won't do that. But this is a long letter, and strap yourselves in. Hi, Rob. I was reading the book Empire of Illusion by Chris Hedges and was amazed by what he writes in the opening chapter, which is an excerpt I share below. Quote, in the Republic, Plato imagines human beings chained for the duration of their lives in an underground cave, knowing nothing but darkness. Their gaze is confined to the cave wall, upon which shadows of the world are thrown. They believe these flickering shadows are reality. If, Plato writes, one of these prisoners is freed and brought into the sunlight, he will suffer great pain. Blinded by the glare, he is unable to see anything and longs for the familiar darkness. But eventually, his eyes adjust to the light. The illusion of the tiny shadows is obliterated. He confronts the immensity, chaos, and confusion of reality. The world is no longer drawn in simple silhouettes, but he is despised when he returns to the cave. He is unable to see in the dark as he used to. Those who never left the cave ridicule him and swear never to go into the light, lest they be blinded as well. Plato feared the power of entertainment, the power of the senses to overthrow the mind, the power of emotion to obliterate reason. No admirer of popular democracy, Plato said the enlightened or elite had a duty to educate those bewitched by the shadows on the cave wall, a position that led Socrates to quip, "As for the man who tried to free them and lead them upward, if they could somehow lay their hands on him and kill him, they would do so." We are chained to the flickering shadows of celebrity culture, the spectacle of the arena and the airwaves, the lies of advertising, the endless personal dramas, many of them completely fictional, that have become the staple of news, celebrity gossip, New Age mysticism, and pop psychology. In the image, A Guide to Pseudo-Events in America, Daniel Borstein writes that in contemporary culture, the fabricated, the inauthentic, and the theatrical have displaced the natural, the genuine, and the spontaneous, until reality itself has been converted into stagecraft. Americans, he writes, increasingly live in a world where fantasy is more real than reality. He warns, we risk being the first people in history who have been able to make their illusions so vivid, so persuasive, so realistic that they can live in them. We are the most illusioned people on earth, yet we dare not become disillusioned because our illusions are the very house in which we live. They are our news, our heroes, our adventure, our forms of art, our very experience. Borstein goes on to caution that an image is something we have a claim on. It must serve our purposes. Images are means. If a corporation's image of itself or a man's image of himself is not useful, it is discarded. Another may fit better. The image is made to order, tailored to us. An ideal, on the other hand, has a claim on us. It does not serve us. We serve it. If we have trouble striving towards it, we assume the matter is with us and not with the ideal. Those who manipulate the shadows that dominate our lives are the agents, publicists, marketing departments, promoters, scriptwriters, television and movie producers, advertisers, video technicians, photographers, bodyguards, wardrobe consultants, fitness trainers, pollsters, public announcers, and television news personalities who create the vast stage for illusion. They are the puppet masters. No one achieves celebrity status, no cultural illusion is swallowed as reality without these armies of cultural enablers and intermediaries. The sole object is to hold attention and satisfy an audience. These techniques of theater, as Borstein notes, have leached into politics, religion, education, literature, news, commerce, warfare, and crime. The squalid dramas played out for fans in the wrestling ring mesh with the ongoing dramas on television, in movies, and in the news, where real-life stories, especially those involving celebrities, allow news reports to become mini-dramas, complete with a star, a villain, a supporting cast, a good-looking host, and a neat, if often unexpected, conclusion. The nation can sit rapt at one of these real-life stories, as happened when O.J. Simpson went on trial for the murder of his estranged wife and her purported lover. A carefully manipulated image of real life, which can be based either on utter fiction or, as in Simpson's case, real tragedy, can serve as a myth on which millions can hang their fears and hopes. The problems of existence are domesticated and controlled. We measure our lives by those we admire on the screen or in the ring. We seek to be like them. We emulate their look and behavior. We escape the chaos of real life through fantasy. We see ourselves as stars of our own movies. And we are, as Neil Gabler writes in Life, the Movie, How Entertainment Conquered All Reality, all becoming performance artists in and audiences for a grand ongoing show. We try to see ourselves moving through our lives as a camera would see us, mindful of how we hold ourselves, how we dress, what we say. We invent movies that play inside our heads. We imagine ourselves the main characters. We imagine how an audience would react to each event in the movie of our lives. This, writes Gabler, is the power and invasiveness of celebrity culture. Celebrity culture has taught us to generate, almost unconsciously, interior personal screenplays in the mold of Hollywood, television, and even commercials. We have learned ways of speaking and thinking that disfigure the way we relate to the world. Gabler argues that celebrity culture is not a convergence of consumer culture and religion, but rather a hostile takeover of religion by consumer culture. Commodities and celebrity culture define what it means to belong, how we recognize our place in society, and how we conduct our lives. I visited the Hollywood Forever Cemetery in Los Angeles. It is advertised as, quote, the final resting place to more of Hollywood's founders and stars than anywhere else on earth. The 60-acre cemetery holds the remains of 135 Hollywood luminaries, including Rudolph Valentino, Tyrone Power, Cecil B. DeMille, Douglas Fairbanks, Nelson Eddy, Bugsy Siegel, Peter Lorre, Mel Blanc, and John Huston, as well as many wealthy non-celebrities. Celebrity culture is, at its core, the denial of death. It is the illusion of immortality. The portal to Valhalla is through the perfect, eternally beautiful celebrity. There's nothing tragic about being 50, Joe Gillis says in the 1950 film Sunset Boulevard, speaking of faded movie star Norma Desmond, who dreams of making a triumphant return to the screen. Not unless you're trying to be 25. We all have gods, Martin Luther said. It is just a question of which ones. And in American society, our gods are celebrities. Religious belief and practice are commonly transferred to the adoration of celebrities. Our culture builds temples to celebrities the way Romans did for divine emperors, ancestors, and household gods. We are a de facto polytheistic society. We engage in the same kind of primitive beliefs as older polytheistic cultures. In celebrity culture, the object is to get as close as possible to the celebrity. Relics of celebrities are coveted as magical talismans. Those who can touch the celebrity or own a relic of the celebrity hope for a transference of celebrity power. They hope for magic. The personal possessions of celebrities, from John Kennedy's golf clubs to dresses worn by Princess Diana to $40 Swatch watches once owned by Andy Warhol, are cherished like relics of the dead amongst ancestor cults in Africa, Asia, or medieval Catholic churches. They hold somehow faint traces of the celebrities themselves, and they are auctioned off for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Pilgrims travel to celebrity shrines. Graceland receives 75,000 visitors a year. The Hard Rock Cafe has built its business around the yearning for intimacy with the famous. It ships relics of stars from one restaurant to another, the way medieval churches used to ship the bones and remains of saints to its various cathedrals. Charlie Chaplin's corpse, like that of Eva Peron, was stolen and held for ransom. John Wayne's family, fearing grave robbers, did not mark his burial spot until 20 years after his death. The headstones of James Dean, Dylan Thomas, Sylvia Plath, Buddy Holly, and Jim Morrison have all been uprooted and carted away. Those who obsess with celebrities often profess a personal relationship with them, not unlike the relationship a born-again Christian professes to have with Jesus. The hysteria thousands of mourners in London displayed for Princess Diana in 1997 was real, even if the public persona they were mourning was largely a creation of publicists and mass media. Hollywood Forever is next to Paramount Studios. The massive white Hollywood letters tower on the hillside above the tombs and the faux Italian Renaissance marble buildings that contain rows of crypts. Maps with the locations of stars' graves, along with a glossy booklet of brief star biographies, are handed out at the gate. Tourists are promised visits with dead stars, who are referred to as residents. The cemetery, which has huge marble monuments to the wealthy and the powerful, many of them non-celebrities, is divided into sections with names like Garden of Eternal Love and Garden of Legends. It has 2 massive Marvel mausoleums, including the Cathedral Mausoleum with 6,000 crypts, the largest mausoleum in the world when it was built in the 30s. Most of the celebrities, however, have plain bronze plaques that seem to indicate a yearning for the simplicity and anonymity denied to them in life. The cemetery, established in 1899 and originally called Hollywood Memorial Park, fell into disrepair and neglect some 8 or 9 decades after it was opened. By the 1990s, families, including relatives of the makeup artist Max Factor, paid to have their loved ones removed from the grounds. By April 1996, the property was bankrupt. The cemetery was only months away from being condemned. It was bought by Tyler Cassidy and his brother Brent, who renamed the cemetery Hollywood Forever and began a marketing campaign around its celebrity residents. The brothers established the Forever Network, where the non-celebrity departed could, at least in death, be the stars of their own customized video tributes. The cemetery website archives the tributes. Families young and old are starting their life stories now and adding to them as the years pass. The cemetery's brochure states, "What this means, having our images, voices, and videos available for future generations, has deep importance, both sociologically and for fully celebrating life." At funerals, these carefully produced movies, which often include highlights from the home videos, 18 Empire of Illusion, are shown on a screen next to the caskets of the deceased. The cemetery's business is booming. It costs a lot to be buried near a celebrity. Hugh Hefner reportedly paid $85,000 to reserve the crypt next to Marilyn Monroe at the Westwood Cemetery in Los Angeles. This prestige service offered by Hollywood Forever wants $5,400. Jay Ballou, the executive vice president of the cemetery, conceded that a plot near Valentino would cost even more, although he did not have the price list with him. "We've sold most of them," he said of those spaces. "Visits to his crypt are unique. Every year we hold a memorial service for him on the day he passed away. He was the first true sex symbol. 10,000 people came to his funeral. He was the first Brad Pitt. He was the first true superstar in film and the greatest screen lover." The most moving memorial in the cemetery is a small glass case containing the cremated remains of actor David White and his son Jonathan White. White played Larry Tate, the Machiavellian advertising executive on the television show Bewitched, and he had a long stage career. He was married to the actress Mary Welch, who died during a second childbirth in 1958. David was left to raise Jonathan, his only child. Next to the urns are pictures of the father and the boy. There is one of Jonathan as a tall young man in a graduation gown, the father's eyes directed up towards his son's face. Jonathan died at the age of 33, a victim of the 1988 bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland. His father was devastated. He entered into a long period of mourning and seclusion and died of a heart attack shortly before the 2-year anniversary of his son's death. The modest memorial is simple and poignant, a veneration of the powerful bond between a father and a son. It defies the celebrity culture around it. It speaks to other values, to loss, to grief, to mortality, and to the awful fragility of life. It is a reminder in a sea of kitsch of the beauty of love. Buses wind their way through the Hollywood Hills so tourists can gawk at the walls that barricade the homes of the famous. The celebrity interviewer profile, pioneered on television by Barbara Walters and now a ubiquitous part of the news and entertainment industry, gives us the illusion that we have intimate relations with the celebrities as well as the characters they portray. Real life, our own life, is viewed next to the lives of celebrities as inadequate and inauthentic. Celebrities are portrayed idealized forms of ourselves. It is we, in perverse irony, who are never fully actualized, never fully real in a celebrity culture. For more, you can read the book. Now, that was from Khaled Reza. Now, I read that whole thing. Now, I would say this, Khaled. I'm sure a lot of people tuned out, but great stuff. I really like what that had to say. But here's what I would say to all that. You know, coming back to cynicism, like, we're born into this life. My question is, what do we do at the time we have when we're here? What are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to do? A lot of people raise children. I mean, the idea of life is to perpetuate itself. And I think that's an admirable goal. To raise children is something which is amazing. To raise great children who go on to maybe do things. I mean, I've been criticized, and I don't necessarily think this is wrong, that I'm more connected to my fictional universes or my flights of fancy or imagination than I have been to people as I've been growing up. And perhaps that's true. And I think that might be true, but I found in my own life that, we have to get through whatever life has for us. And, I dream. I imagine. I have an imagination, I dream. And my imagination and my dreams, I mean, I really like my imagination is very fertile. So when I dream, I have really great dreams. They're really interesting. I usually wake up either contented or exhausted, but exhausted in a good way. And I think that a lot of people, human beings we run the gamut of people that are really intelligent or people that maybe aren't so intelligent. There's all kinds of people in the world, and we all have to figure out how to get through the day. And while it seems to me that this is a damning indictment of celebrity culture, because at the end of the day, what is meaningful? Now, I would say this. So there are a lot of people that are we going to talk about scripture now? There was a little mention of Jesus Christ there, but is religion any different than celebrity culture? And a lot of people would say yes, because religion's real. The Old and the New Testament, totally real. And so you're going to believe in an afterlife and something. I mean, a lot of people do. Is that wrong? I don't know. I mean, once you start dealing with, and think about that. Think about the people that have been looking for enlightenment, whether it's Confucianism or whether you're a Buddhist or whatever. The idea behind all of this is to add to our existence, to make the toil of daily life more bearable. Most people, unfortunately, are not going to be extraordinary. They're going to be living lives of quiet desperation. So I don't feel that, as somebody who talks about celebrities and who talks about movies and who talks about basically what I love about motion pictures is it's a combination of two things. It's a combination of human progress, technology, and how far our technological ingenuity has brought us. That's what I find is so fascinating about movies. And then we're able to use that technology to tell stories which are essentially dreams. Storytelling is dreaming. It's just that it's given a form where you can now share it with somebody it's now outside of your imagination. And we can talk about celebrity culture all you want. Like, I've never been particularly interested in movie stars or how they lead their lives. I've always been more interested in the people behind the camera that are making these choices. But storytelling is all about making sense and adding value to our everyday lives. And if everybody wants to pretend, and I think they are, especially with social media, you can make yourself the center of your own story, whether it's in Facebook updates or Instagram posts or making videos for Pornhub, whatever it is, whatever floats your boat, you can do all of these things. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with mythologizing yourself. And I don't think there's anything wrong. I mean, if all you have is celebrity culture, I think that's sad for you. But I think that, look, I love movies and I love storytelling, whether they're on the big screen or whether I meet somebody on a street corner and they tell me a story, because what it does is it adds to the tapestry of human existence. And, this condemnation of celebrity culture, again, it's easy, of course. By the way, that was eloquently written, and I understand where that guy was coming from, and I want to thank you for sharing it. I want to go read that book now. It makes me want to read the whole book. But, Amusing Ourselves to Death is a book that I've read that I recommend to everybody to read that. Yes, I think we can get too caught up in all of this. But at the end of the day, if you go take a walk by yourself and really stop for a minute, like I'll tell you something. I'm always fascinated by just the neighborhood I live in. I once told Elizabeth's daughter, Sophie, she had a writing assignment in school and she didn't know what to write about. I said, go walk to the street corner. Go down a block, go to the street corner and stand on the street corner and just really look at everything that's in your field of vision. What do you see? You can see trees, certainly. You could see a freeway. You can see a nail place or a massage parlor or a great pizza parlor. Or you could look down and you can see a transit hub. You could see people. Just stop for a minute and just stand there on that street corner. Pick a time, 30 minutes, an hour, and just look. Look at the world around you, right in front of you. That's at the end of your street, and see what you notice, and see what that means. And suddenly, the end of your street, which is something you probably pass by a million times, and you never stop and think about it. You never stand in one place on that street corner because you're always moving. You're always either going past that street corner in a car, you're walking past the street corner to get somewhere else. But stop and see what you see. And ask yourself, what does that all mean? Where did all that come from? What was the first building that was ever put there? When did they pour the concrete? When did they pour the asphalt for the streets? How long has it been there? How long has it taken that tree that's across the street right there to grow? Who planted that tree? When was it planted? I mean, you could sit on a street corner and do it as a writing exercise. And I think we're always trying to look for meaning everywhere we go. And there is meaning to be had in even the most innocuous of places if you just stop and look. And yes, we are inundated with entertainment. Everything has become about entertainment. And yes, our society is becoming increasingly more dumbed down. Because there's people on YouTube that I'm sure turned this show off when I was halfway into reading what you'd put there, which I understand. It's all about entertainment. And as our attention spans get shorter and shorter and shorter, I mean, I don't even know if people can actually stop anymore and sit on a street corner. I don't think Sophie could. I mean, admittedly, she was probably 15 when I told her to do that, but that's okay. But I think that, we're always looking for ways to make our lives more bearable. And mythologizing our lives is one of the ways we do it. But it was an interesting letter. I thank you for passing it along. I really like that. Let's see. Let's see. Hang on. I'm just for a moment. I just lost the plot. Okay, so Richard sends in a tip and says, "Are you looking forward to Marvel's Snowflake and Subspace Subspace? Snowflake and SafeSpace movie in 2024?" I was wondering when someone was going to ask me about this. So for those of you who don't know, there is a new version of the New Warriors, the Marvel comic series, the New Warriors, that is launching. And they have a whole new group of characters, and two of those characters are twins named Snowflake and SafeSpace. I kid you not. Marvel's first non-binary characters. My feeling about all of these things. First of all, when you read about this, I think it's god-awful ideas. What happens when Snowflake and SafeSpace go into battle with, say, Doctor Doom? But anyway, really, first of all, Snowflake and SafeSpace are so 19 or 2015. They've just carried over. Terrible, terrible idea. I mean, it's so pandering. The core idea about it, though, is look, the ideas of safe spaces and the ideas of snowflakes, I understand what they are, but this is the worst kind of behind the curve thinking. It's just bad ideas, just god awful. So no, I'm not interested in a safe space or snowflake movie. And I think what they really represent, the idea of a safe space is not a bad one. But the problem is, it denies the fact that the world is a cold, dark place, and it also eliminates the idea of true intellectual discourse. If you're hurt by an idea, if you can't process an idea, that problem is your problem. It's not the problem of the person bringing the idea that you disagree with. And let's face it, the whole world is about being able to cope. If you can't even cope with an idea that you find distasteful, you're not gonna. What's gonna happen when jackbooted thugs show up at your door and tell you your house isn't yours anymore, and they haul you and your family off to concentration camps? What's gonna happen then? Where's your safe space gonna be there? If you're a snowflake that needs a safe space, What's going to happen when they come for you? I mean, it happened not too long ago. So yeah, I think the whole idea is so stupid. Anthony Gonzalez sends in another tip and says, how much better is the idea of the proto-molecule in the Expanse versus the idea of the facepalm tardigrade from Star Trek Discovery? Well, I think one of the problems that I have with Star Trek Discovery and Picard is they have all these ideas that are incongruous, that don't really work together. They're making these weird leaps, like, for instance, a giant space orchid. I mean, maybe that's an interesting visual, but a giant space orchid as part of the defense perimeter of a planet, you've brought up way too many questions there. Like, I'm all right. Who's controlling the space orchid? Like, the leaps, as an astute viewer understanding the mechanics behind something like that, a space orchid that apparently burned up as soon as it hit the atmosphere. I have too many questions about a space orchid that it might be an interesting visual, but how did it get there? You know, and it's not because, well, you know, there's a letter that's coming up. I don't know if it's next, but I would like to read it. Let's see if I can find it. No, that's not it. Well, maybe I'll have to just get to it. I'll just keep going. Let's see if I can do that. This next letter, ladies and gentlemen, once again, Willow Yang, ladies and gentlemen. Willow Yang has written me a letter. That's right. Willow Yang coming through again. Take it away, Willow. Greetings, Rob. After watching Robservations number 356, I must confess this. I also didn't know that the word meme was first coined by Richard Dawkins in the 70s. This is quite embarrassing on my part because The Selfish Gene, where he used the word, is quite an important book that someone like me should have read. A cursory search on Wikipedia revealed that the word is supposed to be a play on gene, and was used by Dawkins to illustrate how non-genetic elements, such as ideas or behaviors, can propagate and undergo the evolutionary processes of mutation and selection within a culture. Of course, Dawkins coined the term during the pre-internet era, and the way that we think of memes nowadays has changed from when the word was first conceived. So I guess it proved itself. However, the evolutionary process described by Dawkins is still very much applicable to internet memes today. A meme must change and adapt in order to stay relevant and in the cultural zeitgeist, or it will be forgotten and replaced by more successful memes, essentially undergoing extinction. Probably the best example of this evolutionary process that I can think of are the downfall memes, also known as the Hitler rant parodies, which involve people putting fake English subtitles to the scene of Hitler railing over the defeat of his troops in the German-language film Downfall. Of course, German speakers probably won't be able to find much humor in this. I was first turned on to these videos more than a decade ago when I was still in high school, and I've seen them evolve over the years to adapt to whatever major event is happening in our world. From Hitler reacting to the unveiling of the iPad, to the reveal of the Mandarin in Iron Man 3, to Pokemon, to finding out that Taika Waititi would be portraying him in Jojo Rabbit, to the now ongoing coronavirus pandemic. I know that Bruno Ganz, R.I.P., who of course played Hitler in the movie, was initially not overly thrilled with the parodies because he felt it diminished the seriousness of his role and the subject matter. I understand where he's coming from. After all, World War II and the Holocaust should never be taken lightly. However, I don't think there's anyone who's going to watch one of these parodies and think, wow, Hitler and Nazis were hilarious. When doing a parody or making any type of joke, you do have to expect a certain level of intelligence from the audience, that they know what they're seeing is all in jest. As for Star Trek, the two memes that I've seen the most were both from Next Generation, and I think you can probably guess what they are. Yes, they are Picard face-palming and Picard with an arm outstretched saying something. People use those memes as reactions to something. Picard's facepalm was posted whenever someone says or does something idiotic. His outstretched arm meme came in handy whenever someone's trying to argue a point. One example of the latter had the image of him along with the caption, "Why the fuck Would you make fun of a fat person at the gym when you have concrete, visible evidence that they are actively trying to fix the problem? As someone who's never watched an episode of classic Star Trek prior to last year, I knew that the memes had nothing to do with the actual show itself and what it was about. I just thought they were funny and clever. Similarly, I doubt that anyone who's ever watched the Star Trek prequels would come across a Bannekin meme and think that the movies had anything to do with bananas. Conversely, some of the Hanagram memes, Hanagram being a portmanteau of Hannibal and Graham, are actually somewhat accurate depictions of the show and its dark humor and homoeroticism, Hanagram, Will Graham, between the two leads. However, I don't know if non-viewers of the series would be able to understand and appreciate those memes all that much. And speaking of Hanagram, in my opinion, there's a simple answer to why people like shipping, and it's this. We're obsessed with sex. The average human probably spends more time thinking about sex than anything else, and why not? It's the only way that we're going to be able to propagate. To bring this all back to Dawkins, if you ask a biologist what the meaning of life is, and I mean all life, not just humanity, the answer is to have as many offspring as possible so that your genes will live on, similar to memes. I just think that we like to fantasize about characters engaging in some steamy action because it's titillating. It's what we want to do. There are certainly some people who might take their ships too far and become outraged when their pairing doesn't become canon, just as there are, unfortunately, people who think that the current strain of coronavirus has something to do with the Corona beer. I do, however, believe that the vast majority of people do realize it's all just fantasy, or fantasy within a fantasy. Fantaception? I like that. In the end, I like memes as long as they are cleverly done because they just make me smile. And I think it's always good to be able to derive humor from something. I don't really believe that they're detrimental to an IP. Indeed, I actually think they raise more awareness and interest in the property. Going back to Downfall, all the Hitler rant parodies were what turned me and probably many other people onto the movie itself. And that particular scene was still powerful when I finally watched it with, hopefully, the correct subtitles. Yeah, I knew Hitler wasn't going off on the iPad, sounding like some feminine hygiene product, or having a conversation with the version of himself from Inglourious Bastards, but they were still fun to watch. Best regards, Willow. Well, Willow, this is why I love you. What a rollicking letter that was. I mean, you go from memes and Richard Dawkins to human sexuality, back to memes, bringing up Inception, Fantaception, I like that. Fantasies within fantasies. There's a movie there, I think. Once again, a wonderful letter from Willow, and you can go catch up with more of her wonderful letters on, of course, Willow Talk on the Burnettwork website. So thank you for that, Willow. I very much appreciate the stylings that you bring to this channel. I really do. I think that's amazing. And what an interesting letter. Again, constantly amazed at the letters that people write. So thank you for that. What thought-provoking stuff. This letter comes from Omar94. Hey, Rob, thanks for answering my previous letters. I really appreciate that. I really liked Avatar, like yourself, despite it being Dances with Wolves and Pocahontas in space. Like you, I also wish Pandora was real and I could visit it. While I do really like it, I see why others had problems with it in terms of plot and dialogue. I think it would have been better if James Cameron stuck to his original scriptment, Project 880, which was far more sci-fi crazy and epic with a more original story as well as unused plot points, locations, characters, and creatures, which would have fleshed the movie out more. I'm not sure why Cameron made the changes he did for the movie, as I think a lot of what's in his scriptment would improve the movie, and this is coming from someone who really liked Avatar. What do you think? Have you read the original scriptment out of curiosity? Thanks, and live long and prosper. And that comes from Omar94. Well, Omar, I have read that scriptment because I was very curious about it. I think you're right, but we're going to see a lot more of Avatar in the next 4 sequels, literally. Yeah, I mean, look, I think ultimately when you're creating an alien world like Pandora, and literally everything in that was created, everything you see, everything that was on camera when you got to Pandora, they made all that up. the biology, everything, the creatures, everything. I mean, I really love that world. And I think part of the success of Avatar is the world that was created. And it's one of the most fully realized alien worlds we've ever seen in any movie ever. And whether it looked like a 70s prog rock cover or not, I still really enjoyed descending into the world of Pandora and seeing what James Cameron had to show us. I love that. But I agree with you. Look, the scriptment was pretty out there, but he needed to ground it in reality, and that's what he did. He grounded it in a simple story, a classic story that we've seen before. But look, everybody now, it's so fashionable to sort of bag on Avatar. But like, hey man, it's the second most successful movie of all time. I sat next to my mom when she watched it. I believe she was like 70 when we watched it. I've never seen the eyes bug out of her head. She was filled. My mother, the pragmatic realist that she is, was filled with a sense of wonder unlike I'd ever seen in her watching Avatar. And that's all I need to know. You know, it worked for my mom, and my mom is a tough nut to crack. So I would say that Avatar was definitely successful, and I'm looking forward to it. But would I have liked to see it be more sci-fi, more out there? 100%. 100%. I just don't know how he could have done that. But, yeah. Stephanie Littlepage sends in another super chat and says, Star Trek Picard is like a serious version of Solar Crisis, a sci-fi movie directed by Richard C. Sarafian, but which was disowned by him and given the Alan Smithy credit. Solar Crisis is a crazy Japanese financed science fiction movie with a lot of American actors, and I have a soft spot for it. You know, I have a laser. I traded it, but I had a Laserdisc for it, and it wasn't at the proper aspect ratio. But Solar Crisis is definitely, you know what? I bet you I can find. Let's see. If you guys have never heard of Solar Crisis, it's pretty damn bonkers. And here it is. I'm going to put the trailer in the, Trimark. It was this big budget movie. It was like a $50 million budgeted movie, and Trimark released it. And let me put this in the the live chat for you guys, because wow. And you'll see, man, this movie was not cheap. This movie was expensive. And here you go. There it is. There is the trailer for Solar Crisis. Enjoy that. Yeah, by the way, that letter, a lot of people must have jumped ship on that letter, I suppose, but I don't care. I read it. I liked it. Well, Stephanie, thank you for pointing that out, bringing up Solar Crisis. Gotta love that. Jordan's channel sent in a super chat and said, what interface do you and John use for your mics? I'm new to podcasting, and I'm a noob at all things computer sound. Laugh out loud. Love your show. Thanks. Well, these Yeti mics are USB mics. You know, they're USB. That's the only interface. I am not going through a mixer. I should be going through a mixer. I haven't invested in it. You know, John uses a mixer, and he also uses software to fatten up and make things sound better. I haven't got there yet. I mean, obviously John his channel makes a lot more money than I do, and he invests a lot of that into getting more and more gear. So I just use your standard. This is a Yeti microphone that a lot of podcasters use. I'd love to get a Shure microphone, but those are like $400 each. And I'd need a mixing board, but that's all this is. It's a USB mic. You buy it and you plug it in. You're good to go. I mean, I think it's a pretty good mic. It's not a great mic, but it's a pretty good mic, and it's, you know, it's served me well. I've done 367 live chats with it, but that's what it is. Yeah. And yeah. So there you go. This next letter comes from Joe Geiger. Hey, Rob, it's been a while since my first letter to you, which was my lamentation about the disconnect between the MCU movies and the shows that were written as if they were in the world. It's not on your site, but I understand the volume of correspondence your staff has to process and transfer is great. And if my message just didn't reach the mark, I endeavor to improve. I don't know what it was. I don't know why. With Kevin Smith sparking conversation about the chance of Charlie Cox appearing in Spider-Man 3, I have some spin-off questions. Do you see ABC pushing to have their live-action Defenders content made available on an in-house platform like Hulu as soon as Netflix's distribution licenses lapse for each show, or will they wait for everything to free up? Also, does the specific interconnectivity of those shows complicate how soon Marvel Studios or Sony could use particular characters in their projects? Lastly, would Disney have the right to scrub Netflix's presence in those theme sequences and end credits out entirely? As an aside, I don't expect you to remember a question from John Schnepp days at Heroes, but a question of mine you seemed to enjoy back then was about whether Marvel Studios could use the name the Human Torch to refer to the android character that was the first of that name, even though at the time Johnny Storm belonged to another company. Oh, how things have changed. I think it would be sweet if or when Marvel Studios pulls the trigger on either de-aging their prime Steve Rogers or bringing in a multiverse Cap for them to quickly put together an Invaders project, as they have seemingly reacquired the rights to Namor from Universal. Best regards from Minnesota, Joe Geiger. Joe, what a great letter. I remember your name before, so I don't know. Maybe I didn't read the letter. I don't know which letter exactly. A good question. Look, I think all of this stuff is eventually going to revert to Marvel, and they'll put it up on Hulu. I don't think they're going to shy away from it. But I think using Charlie Cox as Matt Murdock, that's a good way to incorporate those characters. One of the things I really liked was I liked I liked Daredevil. I liked Jessica Jones. Obviously, Mike Coulter, man crush on him. I thought Power Man, he was great. Luke Cage was great. I love that. And why wouldn't you incorporate those if you could? We'll have to see. I mean, now it's all being brought under one roof. But, we're now obsessed with continuity. They could introduce new versions of these characters played by other people if they wanted to. I just thought that the Daredevil storylines would do justice to the Marvel Universe. Absolutely. But yeah, I think that why not? Why not? But what a good question. Tiberius Monk sends in a super chat and says, Robert, have you heard of new retro wave, aka synthwave music? If you have, what are your thoughts? If you haven't, give it a listen sometime. I have listened to a lot of retro wave music and synthwave and dark wave. One of my favorite bands. I mean, when you say synthwave, you're talking about, I would assume you're talking about a lot of lyrical music, where people are singing and making it sound like old school bands. But I've listened to a lot of instrumental dark wave and synthwave. One of my favorites being Carpenter Brute, because of Seth Eicherman and the music. I do love retro wave and synthwave and dark wave. I love it all because I grew up with it. So it's great to go back and hear those throwbacks. But again, a lot of it is a throwback to stuff that I've grown up hearing, and I still like it. I still think it's good. So yeah, I enjoy all that stuff. And sometimes I'll go down a rabbit hole and listen to a lot of bands. And yeah. So I've done a lot of that, and I do like that music a lot. So yes. But I can't name a lot of bands other than Carpenter Brute off the top of my head right now. Although I need to get into that. Here's another. Sean Pullen, who I've already heard from today in the chat. Sean Pullen sent me another letter. Greetings, R&B, sci-fi sommelier. Wow. If words or moods could kill, your live stream yesterday would have vaporized Shaban and Goldsman. Robservations, more like Robliterations. I'm going to robliterate something today. Oh, that's a good one. I hadn't thought about that one. I asked you earlier this week not to view my counterpoints as coming after you. That I was a fan and imagined us sitting in a shop chatting. Absolutely. You upped the ante and invited me to bring a whiskey. Well, we've got some good whiskey up here in Canada. Maybe I'll send you a bottle. But I'll drink it. I'll drink to you on camera. But I imagine if I sat down with you yesterday, any whiskey would have caught fire. I'm not sure I would have dared a contrary word, but it was fun watching you blister the paint on the Robservatory's walls. Listen, it's hard to imagine you actually wanting debate on the topic. I feel like a knight approaching a dragon. But you said to keep emailing, so here I am. School closure has freed up my schedule. Have mercy on me, my friend. No one imagines having to defend giant space orchids. Let's get into it. You had so many critiques of episode 9, I could never address them all, so maybe I'll just try 3 big ones. It seems like the biggest critique for most everyone after the last episode is the giant space orchids. Let's start there. You'll remember the rule for hating new Trek: complain about everything even if older Trek did the exact same thing. There's truth in the maxim, but I'll go further. Rule for hating new Trek number 2. If new Trek does resemble old, find ways to justify old Trek, granting new Trek no quarter. So here's a hypothetical for you. What if Coppelius's planetary defense system wasn't giant energy-sucking space orchids? What if it was giant energy-sucking space amoebas? Giant space amoebas? What the hell? Whose hippy-dippy idea is that? Oh, just Robert Sabaroff's, who penned the original series Immunity Syndrome. Yep, 130-odd years previous to La Serena falling prey to a space orchid, Kirk's Enterprise encountered a space amoeba. This space amoeba had annihilated an entire star system, wiping out billions. I can hear the justifications coming. Yes, Sean, but the amoeba wasn't man-made or synth-made. Yes, Sean, but how are the giant space orchids piloted? How do they propel themselves through space? How does an orchid suck power? How do you design a flower to track ships? How bollocks. If you're justifying space amoeba and condemning space orchids, you've lost the plot. It's rule 2. Here's the thing. Ask yourself, what if the original series Immunity Syndrome had giant space orchids defending a planet? Would the first Trekkies condemn Robert Sabaroff? The show had a fucking giant green screen hand and a giant power-sucking space amoeba, but giant space orchids, you say, they wouldn't have suffered that nonsense? TNG had a giant sentient crystal magicaling traversing space at warp. It had a giant space jellyfish converting energy into matter and anticipating people's needs like an omnipresent god, but a giant space orchid, now that's a bridge too far? Listen, I admit giant space orchids are a weird choice. Why go that route? Maybe the writers wanted to depict a culture with a non-violent biotech defense system. Maybe they thought if any fan base would appreciate something novel and a little camp, it would be Trekkies. You know, sometimes I imagine the writer's room. I picture them brainstorming allusions to prior Trek, and they think fans will eat up and love. Hey guys, what if Coppelius's defense system felled ships in the same manner as the original series giant space amoeba, but instead of a giant single-celled creature, maybe a giant plant? Fans will love the nod. Nope. Nice try, writer's room. We like giant space amoebas, but give us space orchids and we'll lose our shit. Correct me if I'm wrong, Rob. You've been a Trekkie longer than me. Isn't a little camp one of the charms of Trek? And what is camp? The dictionary tells me that something has a ridiculous, wacky appeal. When did Trekkies start taking themselves so seriously? When did they lose the innocence that enabled them to enjoy the appearances of the Greek god Apollo or Abraham Lincoln floating in space? When did we stop finding camp charming and start shitting on it? Where is our sense of fun? And listen, I know you've told me before that modern Trek shouldn't be compared to old Trek. It shouldn't be compared to modern peak TV like Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, The Boys, The Expanse. But I've been watching Westworld and The Expanse. They're rich, multifaceted shows, but they also require suspension of disbelief. It saddens me that all fandoms, it's Trekkies, we who've grown up with green space hands, kidnapped brains, crystalline entities, transporters, Katras, symbiotes, you name it, who are unaccepting of the new and wacky, we clamor for post-Nemesis Trek and then hiss when it gives us something new. We say Trek with profanity isn't Trek because old Trek never swore, but new Trek with space orchids also isn't Trek, even if old Trek did something similar. Also, I've beleaguered the point. Next up. Okay, hang on. Since you brought this up, and since we're going to talk about this, You're equating a giant space amoeba to giant space orchids as if those two. Remember, I talked about an ask? All right. We have seen, and indeed, there is a possibility that we could have alien races that exist, alien life that could exist in the vacuum of space. I have no problem believing in that. I have no problem believing that alien creatures could exist in the vacuum of space. I also have no problem believing that such alien life would feed off of energy, because there is all kinds of energy in space. There's the energy from stars, first and foremost. There are solar winds. There are things that, as an imagination connoisseur, I can buy into. So if you're showing me an 11,000-mile-long space amoeba, that is an interesting science fiction concept in the sense that it is providing or showing you a life form that could possibly have existed. How do we know it exists? Well, or how I can believe it came from something that is something we could not yet consider. And that is what I was talking about. You get an ask. And the idea that an energy, that a space amoeba would eat energy, the energy of living beings, is not something that's hard to believe. It's not hard to believe. So, I have no problem with that. However, if you then told me that somebody was using space amoebas as a defense system, what you've done is you've now just piled on 30 or 40 asks on that central idea of a giant space amoeba. A giant space amoeba that can eat energy, that can destroy star systems, that's your ask for that story. But if suddenly somebody is somehow harvesting them, growing them, and then is able to deploy them as a planetary defense system, what you've done is you've strained my credulity or my believability, my ability to believe in that. You've broken that. You've broken my suspension of disbelief because you've piled too many things on the concept of a floating, spacefaring amoeba. That's something like that, beginning with how would you get a giant space amoeba? How would you convince them to, or how would you deploy them as a planetary defense system? Would they always be there? And if they're around your planet, how do you feed them? How do you keep them energized? How do you tell them where to go if one part of your planet is being attacked? So the asks don't work. So when I'm looking at first of all, we already saw a planetary defense system, which is an energy grid. We saw it early on in Picard. Now, we have a synth society that is manufacturing all kinds of entities. We've biological cats, whatever. But with a space orchid defense system. It's not just space-going orchids. You're now asking someone to believe that these orchids can be deployed as a defense system, which, again, piles another 10 or 20 asks on them, on you, on the viewer. And again, I go back to these questions. How are they sent aloft? Or are they constructed in orbit? I don't believe in that, because how are they controlled? How do they move? How are they propelled? Anything, I know what things are, how they behave. I understand basic physics. So if you show me something incongruous like a giant space orchid, I have a bunch of questions that I need to ask. Like, one of the things you could say, well, how does the space amoeba propel itself? And I would say, well, probably as it devours energy, it's got some kind of outgassing or whatever, however that works, I don't know, that would propel it along. But there are things that are inherent. It's only doing a couple of things, so it's not difficult to believe in it. But with the ongoing the space orchid, there's 100 other questions I need answered to believe in something like that. And the author of the story don't have the if we saw a control room, perhaps, and where the space orchids were, we know they had more. How are they launched? Where do they exist? And as an astute viewer of science fiction, I mean, one of the great things about great sci-fi, the sci-fi that I always talk about on this show, whether it's Dune or whether it's Ringworld or whether it's The Wheel of Time or any of these series, is the authors spend a whole heck of a lot of time explaining all of this backstory. And when they give you something like a giant space orchid, you know how it works. You know, it might all be gobbledygook, but it's like, okay, I now understand. But by showing me a giant space orchid, I have had my belief shattered. Because I can't, you can just go ahead and believe that. Interestingly enough, it's interesting that you would turn that around and use the giant space amoeba as something analogous to the space orchid, because if you put that space amoeba, again, in orbit around a planet, I would have those same questions. Because you've just added 20 different asks on top of the one. And I understand, hey, it's a cool visual. But it makes no sense. And when they tell you what, they have 10 left, why do they only have 10? Well, that's convenient. Why don't they have 1,000? If you're going to protect your home planet from an invasion, for instance, why do you only have a certain amount? Why have you only made, clearly not enough? Just go to the other side of the planet. You know, I mean, so that's why I say those things are absurd, because the writers themselves don't know the answers. They don't know how those things are deployed. They don't know how they just don't. They just did it as a cool visual, like they wanted it to be neat. I can't buy into that. That's not good world building. And I think if you get into how science fiction is written, and go pick your favorite science fiction novel, they make you believe these great science fiction concepts are explained to the point where they're using real science and real physics and extrapolating out on something that is actually true. So that's why I can't watch. It has nothing to do with old or new Star Trek. It has to do with great storytelling. And I don't think giant space orchids, the way they're presented in that show, I'm sitting there watching them burn away as they've taken energy out. I mean, how does that work? How do space orchids transfer energy from an inanimate object like a spaceship? And how does it affect them? Is it biological, or only does it look biological? Is it actually a machine? I don't know. It certainly didn't look that way to me. So anyway, now here's number 2, the second hang-up you're going to throw at me. Those poor dumb synths, or sympathy for the apparent disenfranchised synths of Utopia Planitia. I'll quote you. What were the synths doing? This idyllic synth society is living the high life in this beautiful situation, so what about the synths that were working on Mars? Were those the slow bus androids or the short bus androids that they cast out? Like, you didn't turn out so well. You're our handicapped androids. You're our slow androids, so we're going to send you to be slave labor in the Federation. So, the synths working at Mars were not cast-offs, not short bus or handicapped androids. They were not sequestered and enslaved while superior synthetic siblings idled in paradise. The synths at Utopia Planitia were peak android tech at that time. After the attack, when further development was prohibited by galactic treaty, Maddox traveled to Coppelius and continued his research in secret. We know this because Jurati told Picard that she and Maddox were never able to create synths like Data. In other words, sentient androids. She said before was an inferior copy, ultimately not like Data at all. In fact, no other synths has been. We got close, then we got shut down. Jurati hadn't seen the synths of Coppelius, those finally like Data. Again, here's what you said. It's so good. Apparently, there's now an elite group of synths. If you're hot and your name is Sutra and you have an awesome dress, that's awesome. But apparently, if you're a mentally challenged or defective synth, you get cast out of paradise, and we've got to go work at the Utopia Planitia shipyards, where not only have you been cast out of synthetic paradise, you have to go work in a shithole job at the ass end of space. I feel bad for these synthetic androids. I'd hang out with them. Look, I deeply admire your empathy, and that was a blissfully enjoyable diatribe. It was also tongue-in-cheek. There's a lot of humor there. But you missed a beat. Marth's synths were never in paradise, and they unfortunately were never like Data, sentient. That's why they were working at Utopia Planitia. You can get mad and view them as slaves, which they are, but then you better go into the closet and free your Roomba. or maybe Alexa is lonesome and would enjoy a hookup, then they're not really synths, are they? I mean, we're talking synthetic life that has the ability to be, I don't know, they could act independently. You're talking about robot machines. You're not talking about synthetic life that has the ability to revolt. But according to what happened in the show, they did have that ability. And if they did have that ability to revolt, Starfleet believed that they were autonomous, that they could at some point have their own free will, which apparently they believed that they did, even though we know they didn't. But anyway, let's move on. Another important question for you seems to be, why did Bruce Maddox send Soji to work on the Borg cube? This was answered in episode 5 when Picard asks Maddox why he sent Soji to the artifact. To find out the truth about the ban? Maddox answers, there are lies upon lies. They're hiding something. That's why I sent her to find out. Okay, you're taking that as at face value. It was Starfleet and the Federation that banned synthetics. So why are they going to the Borg artifact? But anyway, because it was a joint Romulan Federation project, think of it like a UFO landing in the Pacific and the Chinese, Russian, and Americans agree to investigate it cooperatively. Maybe it landed nearest China and they've given primary authority, but to avoid international incident, cooperation ensues. There was no likelier place in the galaxy in which a Federation citizen might gain access to vital Romulan plans. Once again, I'll stop after the 3 points. I know I'm scratching the surface, probably not convincing you, and your complaints are myriad. I get that you're not buying it. You always tell your listeners it's okay to like things, so it's fine for you to hate Picard too. You're not alone. Maybe you'll find it better when Mr. Bernardin joins the fray. Actually, the new showrunner I have faith in, believe it or not, because he used to work for even Brandon Braga on Voyager. I'll tune in, enjoy your charm, take your barbs about how no reason lifelong Trek fan can enjoy Picard, and wonder what that makes me. Okay, here's the thing. Yes, they have paid lip service to many of these things. But does that really make sense? You know, why would Soji, who obviously her sister was going to go to the Daystrom Institute, all of these things, if you're following these characters, you could easily make more sense of them or what they're doing if this is all explained. One line of dialogue that Bruce Maddox says, Soji doesn't even know what she's doing on the Borg cube. I mean, we see her looking at, people are telling her what she's doing, but what is her job exactly? You know, and I know you're going to tell me, well, we saw her working with people and doing all these things. We also saw Andorians on the Borg cube. We saw civilians, contractors. So clearly there were a lot of Federation members on that Borg cube that mysteriously disappeared over the course of the series. They're not there anymore. But what I want to know is, just tell me up front. Tell me up front. I mean, that's why I want to know about the Romulan government. We're talking about the Zhat Vash. I'll just get into it. Where did they get 200 starships? 200 Romulan warbirds? Where did they get those? You know, the Romulan Star Empire is apparently beaten down, but the Zhat Vash, now in command of a Starfleet Commodore, was able to what? Hey, babe, I gotta, let me just sign out of work and let me jump over and command my Romulan fleet and take it to the Coppelius. Let me go do that. I mean, all of these things, how does that work? You know, how does she jump out of Earth? How does she leave Earth and then go over and make it back to wherever that Romulan fleet is? You know, it's not just one line of dialogue. You can't just explain something away with one line of dialogue. You have to show it to me. What is the first rule of screenwriting? Show, not tell. And we need to see all of these things. If you're going to show me a giant spacefaring orchid, give me a shot of somebody controlling it. We'll launch more. Maybe we'll get that. I don't know, but I just, that's the reason these things, I'm an astute viewer. I understand all of these things. The problem with the writing on this show is they just throw this stuff out willy-nilly, however they want, and it's clear to me they haven't thought it through. And why do I know this? Because I've been reading science fiction my whole life. And I've been watching great science fiction my whole life. So I know when somebody knows what they're doing. I know, I've experienced it. I've read the great tomes, the great work. And, you know, you have to. I can only go by the great science fiction that I've read, and I know what great world building is like. And like I said, you can't just ask for one thing, but you've got to make me believe. And I think a lot of the reason that Star Trek fans are objecting to this, as well as Doctor Who, is not only are these writers coming in and there's a million. This last episode of Star Trek, going by the first of all, the space orchids are one thing, but I need to know, how come Bruce Maddox, after what happened in Measure of a Man, let's take it back even further, when there was Starfleet policy made in that episode, they've conveniently forgotten all about that. The entire point of Measure of a Man, which is that these kinds were not going to do this. We're not going to do this. We've proven that Data is a person unto himself. And then they would go back and allow for a slave race to be constructed, of androids. Well, we could never recreate Data. Well, he did recreate Data. So I guess, why? Because Lore showed up in the guise of Alden Sung and whatever. They were able to do that. I'm sure all of these robots are actually, these androids are all really from Lore. But whatever. I mean, you've got to make me believe. And these criticisms, I don't think, as somebody who is an astute reader of science fiction, I'm never going to buy off on a lot of this stuff, because it's been ham-fisted, and every single episode they've just breezed by all of this stuff, and they haven't made me. Why was Bruce Maddox getting his project funded by a crime boss? I don't know. So his whole thing was, on one hand, they're trying to meet, they send out emissaries to a Starfleet ship to what? I don't know. The whole, a captain killed himself, the Romulans, all of this that we've learned all about what's going on, none of it makes any sense. None of it holds any water. I want to see the entirety of this story. There's 3 years of a story that we've seen here, and all of it was sort of half baked. But anyway, a great letter. But you know why I don't like these things. I think that you know why. So yeah, what can I tell you? Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to bring Robservations chat number 367 to a close. As you all know, in a mere less than 5 hours, Elizaviews whining about movies. Tonight at 8 o'clock, we are talking about The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension. My God, that is what we are doing, and I'm very excited about it. So join us back here in the Robservatory at 8 p.m. tonight for an hour-long show where we look back at Buckaroo Banzai. I want to thank my moderating staff. I want to thank Mike Bodden. I want to thank Detective Jim Boyers. I want to thank Greg Smith. I want to thank Jordy Lyons and Louis Yu for being great moderators and making this community the best on YouTube. I want to thank everybody for, if you haven't subscribed, or you hit like if you can, smash that like button, hit the notifications button. They all help for the analytics. And this day and age, these analytics are more needed than ever. I especially want to thank everybody for supporting the channel, both financially, but also more with your ideas and letters. It's terrific. Between everything you do for me, it's truly great. And I want to thank you for doing all that. Joseph, the crooner, says, is it Coroner? Do you want to be Joseph the Coroner? No, I guess it's Coroner. Episode of Voyager, Author is basically a ripoff of The Measure of a Man, except it's the Doctor in Data's place. Great episode into itself. Yes, I think, yeah, that's kind of true. That's kind of true. You're not wrong. Although Measure of a Man, in Author, they weren't deciding Federation policy, where, as in Measure of a Man, I think they were. But anyway, everybody, I want to thank you again for being here. It's nice to have some normality, to be able to talk to you in times of this global crisis. But thank you very much for all being here and supporting the channel. I want to say this. Remember, as you know, I guess I have to go full frame for this one. As you all know, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, I say good day to you all. And in these crazy times, stay safe, stay healthy, stay socially distanced, at least for the near future. And try and stay sane. Build a model. Read a book. Read a great science fiction book where the world building is believable. Read Dan Simmons' Hyperion. Read Peter Watts' Blind Sight. Read some old school. Read some Dune. Read Gateway by Frederick Pohl. Read, I don't know. Read a Neil Gaiman book. Read Pandora's Star, Peter Hamilton. I don't know. There's so many good books. And report back. But anyway, I will bring this, Robservations episode number 367, to an end. And I will say, as always, have a better day.